Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Tim Schmalz is one of the most important sculptors working nowadays. For over 30 years, Tim Schmalz has been sculpting large-scale sculptures. He's a figurative artist with his pieces, productions installed worldwide. Some of his most reputed pieces are installed in historical churches, not only in the United States of America, but also in Rome and the Vatican. Timothy Schmalz describes his most important work as visual translations of the Christian scripture. Although most of his work is based upon a spiritual theme, he also creates large and complex public sculptures in bronze. Tim strives to create epic artwork that connects with viewers through design and details that not only touch the viewer on an emotional level, but also allow them to feel somewhat a part of the piece. And Timothy Schmalz considers himself devoted to creating meaningful sculpture about meaningful things. And he describes his sculpture as being a visual science. As Saint Gregory the Great wrote, that art is for the illiterate. The use of images was an extremely effective way to educate the general population. Our contemporary culture is in the same state today because we need art to understand the Bible, not because of illiteracy, of course, but because people are too busy to read and to pay a deep attention. Sculpture has the capability of creating visual bites. So these words are from Tim Schmalz, from his biography, and that introduce thoughts in a universal language. Sculpture, said Timothy Schmalz, acts for many as a gateway into the viewer's own self-understanding and spirituality. The more powerful the representation of the art is, the more powerful the invitation becomes. And as Timothy Schmalz states, to create a work that has the strength to both focus and then hold one's attention, thereby deepening the understanding of the subject being presented. This describes his purpose as a sculptor. And just to indicate some titles of his religious sculpture, in 2019 he produced the famous Angels Unawares in St. Peter's Square in Rome, this monumental work, and then the Homeless Jesus. And in 2016, he presented also When I Was Hungry and Thirsty, When I Was Sick, When I Was a Stranger, When I Was Naked. And in 2016, he worked also for the Meeting Sculpture Park, and many other works that are not only in the United States of America, but also in Italy, in Rome, and Vatican, and in Florence. And media and newspapers and publications are dedicated to his work. Tim, hello. It's an honor for me to have you in this episode of the radio program Discovering Sacred Christian Art. Tim, I apologize for my Italian English. I am from Italy, Milan area. I strongly hope to be able to meet you, Tim, in Milan or in Rome. I often in Rome, but I would like to meet you. And first of all, my congratulations for your artworks. And I can say that I met your work when I had in front of me the image of the work dedicated to Saint Padre Pio. I absolve you. That was great. And I remember that maybe 2 years ago, I sent the picture to our students of the Holy Apostles. I was teaching online the course dedicated to aesthetics in sacred art. And I said, wow, that's a great artwork. I absolve you. And tell Timothy, if I don't make a mistake, it's in front of the St. Patrick Old Cathedral in New York City. That's okay? Yes, that's correct.
Yes, it is. Yep.
Okay, great, Timothy. And I read about you, about the great monument in St. Peter's Square.
Yeah.
First of all, Tim, I read that you are a Canadian artist, but just a question. Are you working now in Canada, or are you based in New York in this moment, where you have your workshop?
Yes, I'm based in Canada. I have 2 studios in Canada that I work from, and I have one in China that I also work from. So I have studios in both places around the world. The nature of my work is Christian artwork principally, and ever since I can remember, I loved art. And so actually when I was 16, I started to do sculpture, and it wasn't until later I found almost exclusively a passion for Christian artwork and creating and giving kind of a visual representation to Scripture. And so it's been a long journey. Right now, this year, I've turned 50, and I find it fascinating because I still feel that there is so much more to do.
I understand. And Tim, I can say that the homeless Jesus is, first of all, is a sculpture, a bronze sculpture, and it represents Jesus as a normal homeless person. In this sculpture, Jesus is representing by Timothy Schmalz as sleeping on a normal bench. Tim, could you explain us which was your inspiration for this work?
That sculpture shows Jesus as a homeless person sleeping on a bench. And the eureka moment about that sculpture was when I was in a large city and I saw a homeless figure. I don't know if it was a male or a female, totally shrouded in a blanket. And it just moved me beyond belief. And I left that experience or that encounter believing and feeling like I just saw Jesus. And so when I went back to my studio, which was out of the city with no homeless people around, that image still kept with me and that experience. So I decided to visually sculpt what I felt in the hope that other people would feel the same way. And so it's an amazing project. A bronze cast of the life-size version is in front of the Papal Charities building at the little piazza inside the Vatican. Kind of difficult to get to if you're just a tourist because you have to go through the Swiss guards.
This is not the first time that Jesus is represented as a homeless in the history of art. But this is maybe, I can consider it, one of the most important cases of a contemporary representation of the homeless Jesus. And personally, I consider this work as a great representation done with a great symbolic strength, and I consider it a great representation full of symbolic references. But we can refer also to another sculpture of Timothy Schmalz that deserves a great attention, that is as an exhibition, Madonna and Child, and of course, Let Oppressed Go Free. I would like to ask you about the work, the sculpture presented on Sunday, September 29, 2019, in St. Peter's Square in Rome. At short notice, in that day, I couldn't be in Rome because in that day took place the baptism of my son, of my first son. So I read about you and about the event, and I would like to ask you how the idea of this sculpture, of this work, was generated. And I know that you collaborated with some cardinals in the Vatican, and they guided you in your idea and your works. And I would like to ask you the origin of this work, and how was the meeting with Pope Francis for the presentation of this sculpture?
Well, that's a very exciting time of my life. Let me begin by saying that when I do my sculptures, I listen to the Bible nonstop for years. And when I listen to the Bible as I work, ideas of Scripture come into my head or my heart, and I keep them in a library, and I want to find a way to represent, to visually translate some of the ideas. So 2 years before I started the sculpture, I fell in love with a passage, Hebrews 13:2, which says, "Be welcoming to strangers. Many have entertained angels unawares." That scripture passage hit me.
I really appreciate the title, Angels Unaware. It's a great title for this work. Sorry for the interruption. That's great.
Yes, and it was that I struggled and wrestled for 2 years. How do I represent that perfectly? How do I give translation visually to that? I went to Rome, and Cardinal Czerny asked me to do a new sculpture on the idea of migrants, immigrants, refugees. Yeah. And he said, just think about it, just think. And if you come up with a design, we need a sculpture like that. The Catholic Church needs a sculpture like that. So I went back to my studio in Canada, and 1 day later, the whole idea of the sculpture instantly came to me, like it came down from the ceiling of my studio on my lap. I was so excited. I envisioned all historical figures on a boat, all modern historical, all races, all cultures on one big boat. In the center would be an angel, but because there's so many people, you can't see the angel except for his wings. Then the wings belong to everyone. The fascinating thing about the sculpture is, although it has more than 100 figures in, it's a very, very subtle sculpture, because I needed that many to make the message discreet. The angel is just one of the many inside. Everyone is represented, but it is done because there's so many, they blend in with one another. If I would have just done one African, one Chinese, one European, it would be a cliche. It would be too forced. But ironically, because I have 100 in them, the message, the scripture, Hebrews 13:2, be welcoming to strangers, many have entertained angels unawares. It becomes discreet. It becomes a message that reveals itself. And also all the different people, they subtly come out. And therefore it becomes a very, very powerful piece.
And in fact, I see from pictures people, refugees from Nazi Germany, Jewish from Syria, from the Irish famine of the middle 19th century. And I can see also an angel. I see faces of desperate people escaping, searching for a new life. And I can say that with this work, you created a face, a symbol for all what is the meaning of the immigrant, not only for the past, but also for today. And we know how Pope Francis is close to the demon, to the suffering of all what is related to be an immigrant. My ancestors were immigrants too, from Europe to United States of America, and I can understand the condition, the situation of an immigrant related to the contemporary age. It's so strange because sometimes it's like we lost the sense of the term immigrant. And you represented this condition very well, and I'm looking forward to seeing in real this artwork. And my congratulations, first of all, Tim. Sorry if I ask you how much time require you this work? So months, years to produce it?
It took me 1 year. I stopped every other sculpture project I was doing to do it. And it was, what it is it's a sculpture garden in one sculpture. There's so much involved in it. The beautiful thing about that is not only did I represent all different people, different histories, different religion, different race, but also different emotion. If you look at it, I had more than 100 chances to get an emotion right. And I had 100 chances more to show what I imagine the refugee, the immigrant must feel. Sometimes on the sculpture you'll see happiness, other times horror. And only with so many figures could I give dignity to the idea of immigrants that built up countries and refugees that are escaping wars. Sometimes you need a lot of sculpture to say a simple thing. And the simple message on this sculpture is all human life is sacred. And that's because the wings are in the center. The wings, in a sense, belong to everyone. The fascinating thing also about the project, you asked me, what did Pope Francis, what was the reaction with Pope Francis? The fascinating thing is Cardinal Michael Czerny. He's the person that requested me to do this. Cardinal Michael Czerny respects artists. His mother was an artist. And so he basically said to me, go do what you do, Tim. And and Cardinal Czerny says that, and Cardinal Czerny also described Pope Francis when I talked to him. He says, Pope Francis trusts people. Pope Francis gives people jobs, and he leaves them alone to do it. And like that, like his philosophy of having faith in people, they had faith in me. I do believe the first time Pope Francis saw the sculpture finally was September the 29th when it was unveiled in St. Peter's Square. It was amazing. Although he does not speak English, he gave me a sign that he absolutely loved the sculpture. After looking at all the details in the sculpture, he came up to me and he just put his hands on his heart and looked at me. And at that point, I knew.
I knew from the news, and I saw from the pictures that it was a great enthusiasm in him while watching your sculpture and presenting. Yeah, I saw the ceremony, and it was a great moment, I think. And also because it was like you had worked with Pope Francis, representing an idea he has of the immigrant, and I'm sure he really loved this representation, because it is not just the work, but the representation itself of a symbol of a condition. And congratulations, Tim, because this will remain a great work with important meaning, and a meaning for our times. And you did something great, Tim. And can I ask you another thing, Tim? Do you have the time for another question?
Yes, one more question, then I have to go. We can continue in the future, though, but yes, please ask me a question.
Okay, Tim, back to my first impression, I would like to ask you the meaning for contemporary men of an artwork like I Absolve You, the artwork dedicated to San Padre Pio, that is in New York, this statue of San Pio. And I had the impression that the people, the men and the woman nowadays is searching for a moment of confession, and I was very interested in this work, I Absolve You. And I just want to ask you the origin of this idea and your experience in doing this sculpture.
Yes. This was a beautiful moment in my life. I wanted to do a sculpture of St. Padre Pio at a confessional. And I started to do research on St. Pio on the internet. And all I saw was skepticism about his stigmata. And then I thought, I got angry at the sense. And I threw my hands up and said he was just an imitator of Jesus. That is his message. And the moment I exclaimed that, the whole sculpture again presented itself to me. That one would come up to a sculpture and see the Saint Padre Pio at a confessional. And it would be a sculpture that someone would be able to interact with. And when they sit down thinking that they would see St. Padre Pio through the window, they see the hand of Jesus. Instead of seeing St. Padre Pio's covered hand with the stigmata, they see Jesus and his real hand with the open wound. That is what I feel sculpture has to do now today. Sculpture has to be powerful or it becomes invisible. I am competing with a world of cynical people. I'm competing with people that are overstimulated, that have everything at their fingertips with their phone. In order for sculpture to exist today, it has to work hard. It has to work hard for the attention. This sculpture does it because it goes beyond sculpture into the world of theater arts, I believe. That the viewer no longer is looking at an ornament, but he is becoming a part of the sculpture in a way that the message is revealed subtly, almost like a eureka moment. The sculpture confronts one. This sculpture made me fall in love with St. Padre Pio. During the time that I was doing it, it was a very, very prayerful time. And throughout this, the experience about creating this sculpture, St. Pio has become my favorite saint throughout it. And the sculpture, there is one at the old cathedral in New York City, but there's also one in San Giovanni Rotondo, right at the confessions areas at in the shrine in southern Italy. There's also one in Limerick, Ireland, right in the center of the city. There's also one that has just been received to Tanzania, Africa. What a delight I have knowing that the sculpture of St. Padre Pio is being spread across the world. And by it being spread across the world, the saint is having his promotion around the world. So it was a great process, great project.
Thanks, Timothy. And last question, very last. It's not a question, but it's a sort of invitation for a future meeting with you in a radio program. I know, I read that you are creating a sculpture dedicated to St. Thomas Aquinas, Howard St. Thomas Aquinas. Is it true? I read correctly from a newspaper online that you are creating a bronze sculpture for St. Thomas Aquinas University. Is it true, this news? And
yes.
Are you working on it? That's
yes,
great.
I'm working on it.
Oh, that's
and
great.
And like the saints are filled with so much exciting stuff. And I want to, with my sculpture, bring that excitement and those amazing ideas out. St. Thomas Aquinas, how many ways could I sculpt him? Infinitely. There's so much to the saint. But I chose to take his representation to be how people talked about him. Before he was canonized, it was required that miracles happen. And a famous quote of his said, all of his works were miracles. And so I have the St. Thomas holding a book in his book with the pages that become alive and they start flying up into the sky and they transform into a dove. All of his works were miracles is what I wanted to represent with that piece. It's wonderful. I'm happy to be doing it. And what I realized at the age of 50, after 30 years of obsessively sculpting, there is so much to do, and that's a compliment to an amazing theology, an amazing religion, which I do believe in the year 2020 has just started to become represented by artists. That by no way is this the end of creation and representation of the powerful, hardcore ideas in the Bible.
Thanks, Timothy. Thanks, and I
thank you so much.
We will have the occasion to talk again, and mostly on this last work you are working on. And congratulations! I know you are a world-renowned sculptor, and I have been following you. But thanks to Sebastian Mahfoud, I entered in touch with you, and it's an honor for me. I strongly hope we will have the occasion to collaborate also for a future text, for an interview or a catalog. And it's interesting. I am studying your production, and congratulations again, Tim. And I wish you all the best in your daily work, and be inspired, but you already are. Thanks, Tim.
Bye.
Thank you, Tim. Bye-bye. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfoud. Good day.